Everyone, welcome to episode 28 of Heroes Hype Live. I am your host, Argy. With me as always is Dunkstick. How you doing, bud?
Good morning. It is a great day to be here.
Good morning. Where do you live?
Could be in Europe, you never know.
Maybe. Once again, we have Ryan Fairchild from Brooks Pierce Law Firm with us to talk about anything and everything in terms of law and esports and their relations. I'll start the show off by saying that this episode is... Hold on, I lost it. This episode is brought to you by Brooks Pierce Lawyers, supporting the esports and gaming communities with creative solutions to legal challenges. Learn more at brookspierce.com/esportslaw and follow Ryan on Twitter at Fairchildthe, FAIRCHILDTHE. So Dunk, why don't you introduce?
The whole spelling there.
Yep. People sometimes get confused. I don't know. So Dunk, why don't you introduce our guest?
Hi, everybody. Ryan is an esports attorney representing esports players and stakeholders in negotiating and drafting contracts, as well as structuring endorsement deals. As a disclaimer, please do not take any of his thoughts on today's show as legal advice, not device, and please seek him out directly with your questions. You can find him once again on Twitter or via email. He's a passionate, lifelong gamer who currently plays Dota 2, Counter-Strike, Overwatch, as well as Heroes of the Storm. He has various understanding of esports. He has understanding of various esports ecospheres, cultures, and dynamics, and the legal problems faced by those in the industry. He's been around for quite a long time. Excellent guy, great to talk with, and he's here today to answer your questions and go over some common things in the field.
For sure.
Luckily, we'll be talking a lot more than reading, so I think we'll get better as it goes on, guys.
I think we might need to go back to school, honestly. Anyway, getting right into it, I wanted to first talk about contracts and players' rights. Now, we mentioned it a little bit last week, but I wanted to go more in depth this week and really talk about how the contracts for esports players and other people in the field how far they have come since the beginning. Like, was it just a handshake agreement to start, or was it like a full-fledged contract? And then how much goes into the contract now? Like, what types of things are we seeing specifically for esports, if there are any? And then going to players' rights, how should a player value themselves versus how do teams value the player?
Do we maybe want to break that into chunks there?
Yeah, that's just a general thing, but we'll start with the contracts.
All right, yeah, all right. So contracts. So I was not in some ways I was in at the beginning, but I was not at the beginning where people started getting sponsored. I remember, esports used to be you paid $5 to play in a fighting game tournament, and however many people showed up, that was your prize pool. And if you got third, maybe you walked away with your entry fee again. And if you won it, you went and bought a couple dinners. So back in the day, I don't know exactly what it looked like when people first started getting sponsored, but I could imagine. And I'm guessing it was probably, hey, let's put a team together. We'll probably need some sort of contract. We'll pull it off the internet. It's like 3 pages. It's the worst thing you've ever seen. And now we've moved on to 30, 40, 45-page documents that deal with a bunch of different aspects, that deal with a bunch of different scenarios that might get screwed up. But even today, I was looking at a contract that was signed by a well-known player, by a well-known organization that was only 6 pages, terribly drafted, all sorts of problems. So, we're still moving along towards these better contracts, and you can tell pretty quickly who's really talked to a lawyer, who hasn't, and where they still need to move. So now, though, contracts are definitely getting better. I think a lot of that has to do with people like Bryce and Ryan, other lawyers in the space who have helped to bring it along. I also think that the advent of big sports franchises, their general counsel, they're going to be very serious about those contracts. They're looking at much bigger investments, and so they want those things to be tight and to address a lot of the issues that are coming up.
Okay. Now you mentioned like the 6-page document that you saw was awful.
Yeah.
Like, one thing that I think a lot of players coming into the scene, and this is like the first time that they'll really ever have a legal binding document that they have to sign and read through, they don't really know what to look for. So what I'd like to know is what are the types of things that you as a player should want in a contract, and what types of things should you be looking out for?
All right, yeah, that's a big question. So we're going to speak in generalities here because it's really going to depend on the individual contract.
Mm-hmm.
But the big areas I think of are your intellectual property rights, your termination clauses, your warranties and representations, and we can get a little bit more into each one of these. And of course, your compensation. But the biggest thing I think players want to be worried about is, I come at this with a litigator's eye. So I come at this as somebody who's most of my experience comes in litigating court cases and suing people or defending people who are being sued. And so when I first started looking at contracts more closely, I look at them with that perspective. And so I look at what is every way that my player can get screwed by this contract, and what is every way that we could, I don't want to say screw the team, but get back at the team. That if we need to enforce this, we are good. So I look at contracts from like, when this blows up, when this goes south, where is it going to go south? Where are we not covered? What scenarios are we missing? And that's something that, comes with experience, and I'm still learning. I have a lot of good attorneys I work with who I bounce ideas off of, but generally that's what you want to be thinking about, is what are all the ways I'm not thinking about that I could get in trouble? So let's dive into a few of those specific areas. Termination, I think, is one of the biggest things. You want to look at all the ways that the team can terminate you for cause. And usually there will be a specific list. If that's not even in your contract, if some of the things I mentioned, like your intellectual property rights, warranties and representations, termination, aren't in your contract, that's a good sign that you should be a little worried about your contract, because it's probably not very well drafted. So you want to look at what is the list of ways that the team can terminate me for cause. And so to do a specific example, usually there's something in there about if player is in material breach of this agreement, then the team can terminate for cause. And I always push, for example, for a cure period where the team has to let you know, hey, we think you're in breach of the contract. You now have 2 weeks, 30 days, whatever time to get back in compliance with the contract, or we are going to terminate you for cause. So there are little adjustments like that that can be made to help protect players' rights. Warranties and representations are things that you are asserting are true. And usually there's indemnification that goes with that. Indemnification meaning that if one of those things isn't true and a third party sues the company, you then have to protect the company, like pay for their defense, things like that. You want to be very careful about what you're representing, make sure you can accurately say those things. Intellectual property rights, the horror story that comes with intellectual property rights, as I think we've mentioned before, is you give up all your intellectual property rights in perpetuity to some team, and now you don't actually own your IP to like your likeness and your voice and things. Like if you do anything out in the media, suddenly your team owns it, and you have to go back to them every time to try to get a license back from them in order for you to go do something with another team or with a sponsor or something. So those provisions, I think, are very underrated, particularly because as esports grows, independent sponsorships, you think about like, you get that Coke deal or you get that shoe deal when you're in the NBA, like you get that Nike deal or that Adidas deal. Yeah, or, Dunk's really trying for that Coke deal right now. Come on, Coke, give him that sponsorship. You get that deal, and that's where the real money is. You look at Kevin Durant, and his shoe deal is almost as big, if not bigger, than his NBA contract. So you want to make sure you have really good intellectual property protections, because all of esports, what it's really doing is it's advertising, it's marketing. Mm-hmm. It's people who want to watch things, and then you make the money by marketing other things. I mean, Twitch helps, you get subscriptions, you get streamers, but where is that money going? Not only is it going to Twitch, but they're then saying, you have this many views, we're going to drop advertisements in, and that's going to be another big source of Twitch's revenue. Mm-hmm. So termination, intellectual property, warranties and representations, and then you kind of want to look at what ambiguities are there. So what are your duties and what are the ways that, you know, they're ambiguous, they're not closely worded, so that the team can say, well, you know, you were supposed to show up on practice. We didn't have to tell you when practice was going to be, but we set it for 3 a.m. and you didn't show up, so we're going to get rid of you. You know, something ridiculous like that. Mm-hmm. You would think that that's kind of crazy, but scenarios not far off of that can help, can happen. So anyway,
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I could see a scenario where you didn't have it set. So like, yes, you have to show up to practice, but they don't have to tell you when practice is, or they only have to send out this sort of notice like, oh, it's by email. I'm 19. I don't check my email. And practice at 3 a.m. They're trying to get rid of me. They put it for like this ridiculous time. And, oh, you're in breach of contract. Goodbye.
Yeah, so you want to really look at your contract and be sure of what they can do. So I talk to people all the time about, you know, just be aware, you know, we'll negotiate a contract. Maybe we don't get everything we want. And so I'll have to advise them, be aware that these are the danger spots that you want to be aware of so you don't step in anything.
Okay. So moving on.
So enthusiastic there, Artie. Yeah. Just, okay. All right.
Sorry.
That's all right.
It is interesting because, like, I've never had to sign that kind of contract before. So being able to look for the warning signs and know what I need to have a solid, I guess, foundation for starting my career is always very important to know.
Yeah, and these will apply. I mean, the things I'm talking about, you can carry this over into a lot of other contract rules as well. I mean, there's nothing in esports contracting that is particularly different from general business contracting. It's more the context.
Okay.
And understanding how the context works and that interaction between the two. But, you know, if you don't understand esports and you come in and you're going to miss a lot of issues that maybe are issues in the contract, but otherwise the general principles of contracting are the same.
Okay, for sure. To Yoshe in chat, go ahead and post it. Dunk, if you don't mind copying the question and putting it in Discord so we can ask it at the end of the show.
Yes, sir, I can do, Mr. Guy.
Sweet.
By the way, Arky, if your contract's only 6 pages long, you should probably seek legal advice.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. Now, moving on to the other topic that I mentioned. What I want to know is, as a player, how should I value myself? Because I think a lot of people, whether they're like really shy and don't get like socially, they're not as, I don't know, this seems like it always happens to these types of people, but they don't value themselves high enough, or people will value themselves too high in terms of like a starting point. So where should a player value themselves to the team, and vice versa? How should a team value the player when creating a contract?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So this gets more into economics, right? Like, both sides are looking to extract surplus. They have some amount that they value the other side at. So the team has some amount below which it is going to pay the player. And the player has some amount above which, if they get paid, they're willing to play for that team. So then really it's about that distance between those two numbers. And you'll have other things that get included in there. Sometimes there are performance incentives. Sometimes there's merchandise share. There are other things that can go into the compensation model, but most people think of like your base salary. And so there's some number in between that range of what they're willing to pay and what you're willing to take where you can negotiate. And so there are a couple ways to do that. You know, teams within the same esport can pay wildly disparate amounts. So it's a matter of knowing what the market is and trying to leverage the best deal possible. I also think this is one of the reasons that players, we'll get back to the main question of how do players value themselves, but I think there's a lot that goes into it. You want to know how well you performed, what you brought to a team, and not just performance results, but intangibles. Like, what leadership do you bring? What things are you going to do to help drive sponsorship numbers? What things are you going to do to get out in the community and interact? Maybe, you know, kind of like the NBA cares aspect, do public service, things like that. You know, you see on Twitter, like, people getting up and doing cosplay recently that gets a lot of attention. Like, you what are those things that you can bring to the table that show your value? A lot of people think it's just the quality of play, but you're in the public sphere. So it's going to be a lot more than just that.
Mm-hmm.
With a team evaluating it, they're looking at those exact same things. They're looking at what value are they going to bring to us? And not just in terms of play, but in terms of sponsorship. Yes, winning is important. Winning gets a lot of attention. But if you've got this really charismatic personality and you can draw a lot of people in, that's big. So ultimately determining your value is going to be knowing the market. I think that's an area where an agent or an attorney who really knows the market can help you a lot, because they'll have dealt with a lot of these deals. They'll have seen salaries. They'll know kind of what the range is. And they can say, all right, tell me who you're, play-wise, who you're compared to. And then let's look at the intangibles and say, all right, play-wise, he's about at this, but, he does these other things that player doesn't, so he should get this corresponding bump in the salary. She does this, she brings in this many views, so she should get compensated for that as well. You can build a lot of those incentives in. So I think there are a lot of different metrics, but don't just think about play. Think about everything else. That's why having your public persona, building that public persona, building that public profile is really important for players as well. And as I said before, intellectual property rights, because I think a lot of the big money in the future is going to be in independent sponsorships. Get Dunk That Coke sponsorship.
One thing that I've noticed, especially in the Heroes scene, has always been like things like the intangibles. Like one thing that I always look for when I'm looking at a player that I want to follow is not only are they active on Twitter, because they need to market themselves, and I think that's one of the main issues that a lot of people have, is they don't know really how to market their brand. And then like streaming, and I think streaming is a huge pull for sponsors, organizations, things like that.
Yeah, a lot of teams require it. A lot of teams require a certain amount, and it's because that is a very easy number for them to take and show to potential sponsors of like, hey, we've got this many people who are streaming this many hours, bringing in this many viewers, and that's what they're going to sell sponsors on.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. I get where that's coming from, because it's a lot of like how I'm building my own personal stream. I interact with the community as much as possible. I'm on Twitter, commenting on posts. I stream. I try to keep a set schedule. I come on HeroesHype Live and talk about the game. I put my face out there.
Yep.
And I think looking at it, if I were to have two players, similar skill, but one player likes to get out there and talk to people, and one player is kind of like, I just want to play the game, I think I'm going to value the one that plays well as interact with the community, because they bring a lot more to the table than just, I'm a good player.
Totally agree.
Yep. I want to ask this one now because I think it's relevant, especially in the past week or so, few weeks. This is from Maybe Buzz in chat. What do you think about professionalism or sportsmanship clauses in contracts? And do you think they will become more prevalent and restrictive over time?
So as somebody who's on the players' right side, those are typically one of my least favorite provisions, particularly because of how broad they are. So I don't have a problem with having a code of conduct or having certain rules and having fines. What I don't like is ambiguity, because for me, when it's ambiguous, that's downside risk for the player. You don't know what they could hit you with. They could choose anything. A lot of them are very subjective. There are lots of these things about the team and its best judgment can determine if you've done harm to them, something like that. And so that is a big risk area. I push back a lot on those. I typically like to see what is the behavior that could be fined. Let's talk about it. You can maybe make some of those have some flex, but overall, we should be able to have a conversation about what type of things can be fined. And especially as time goes on, I actually think that should be more defined, because you'll end up with more scenarios where you can clearly define this went wrong. Mm-hmm. So let's write something in the contract about it to make sure we avoid it in the future, so that you know what could go wrong and what you could get fined for, or suspended, or kicked off the team for. Mm-hmm. So, I understand that they have to protect brand, that there's certain behavior that's unacceptable that they have to fine or penalize or kick somebody for. But right now, frankly, I think those clauses, as I have seen them written, are far too expansive.
Okay. So we need to basically, as time goes on, I think it'll be easier, but narrow them down and be more specific on what exactly teams are wanting.
That's what I want to see. I mean, the way I see it right now, when it's an expansive clause, it's as punitive as it can be because they can basically decide how they want to use it. We think about it in a criminal context, right? If you have a really ambiguous criminal statute, the prosecutor can go out and he or she is basically the one deciding how to use that criminal statute to prosecute criminals. If it's very narrow, like, on the 21st day of May at 7 a.m., if you are standing in this spot, then that's some sort of violation. Not a lot of discretion for the prosecutor. He just says, all right, don't be standing there on that day at that time and you're fine. Mm-hmm. So I think right now is the worst when they're these very expansive things. And as we go along and we can sort of, especially on the player side, push back and say, no, you've been through a lot of iterations of players who've screwed things up. Let's write those into the contract. And then maybe have something that's a little flexible, but don't come back and fine me or penalize me for something that you never warned me about.
For sure. And I think this kind of relates to like the termination clauses.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. Oh, definitely.
So anything that can go wrong or that's in there could be cause for termination or maybe suspension or a fine at least. So
it depends on how you build the contract. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to depend on the specific language.
My quick question is, how often do you find yourself renegotiating contracts before the term is up? Like, do you find a lot of times that something pops up like, oh, shoot, like, I can't believe this isn't covered. Like, we need to addend this. Like, is that something that comes across your table, seeing as it is still a relatively new process?
I have not had that come up. I have had contracts sort of fall apart where we've mutually agreed to end them, and then we'll go out and find a new contract. But I haven't had something where we need to amend it right then.
Okay.
So, I mean, quick answer to that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe you're just such a good lawyer. You just like, I covered it all.
Yeah. Yes. Sure. I'm not gonna say that.
Okay, so I want to move on to our next topic, which is going to be how a player is basically employed, whether it's via contract or if they're an actual employee of an organization. So, what?
All right, so this is a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you have a follow up on that?
Yeah, sorry. I do. So, what actually matters in how the agreement is operated, and how much control does a company have over a player if they are the employee or a contractor?
So it's sort of a sliding scale. Let's independent contractors, let's talk about the benefits and the differences a little bit. An employee, typically you have to, depending on the size of the company, there may be regulations that require you to provide certain benefits. So like with the Affordable Care Act, for example, companies over a certain size were required to provide health benefits to their employees. And under a certain size, you were exempted. So that was for employees, not for independent contractors. There are certain tax differences, both on the employee side and the company side, whereas independent contractor, you get a different form. You're responsible for paying a lot more of your taxes. The company tends to not pay as much. They don't have to pay payroll taxes and workers' compensation and disability, things like that. So there's a big difference in the benefits required and the tax implications. And there's some other ones that get a little nuanced, but the difference in terms of determining which depends on several factors. And they're not really concrete, like there's a black line, and once you cross onto the other side of the line, then all of a sudden you're an employee, and once you're on the other one, you're a contractor. There are different analyses that you do. So there's the scope of control. The more control that the employer exercises over the manner and means that somebody performs services, the more likely that person is to be found to be an employee. So if you say, here is our process, McDonald's says this is how you prepare French fries, and you must always prepare French fries this way, you're more likely to be an employee. There are financial aspects, how the money is controlled, how the money is paid. If you are paid for delivering a certain product, kind of like I'm in charge of delivering you 100 widgets, and each time I deliver 100 widgets, you will pay me $100. That's a lot more likely to be a contractor. Whereas if it's this ongoing, I pay you $15 an hour and however many widgets you make, those are my widgets. Like, more likely to be an employee. So there are a lot of different analyses that go on. There are a few more factors that go into it. But in my view, by and large, when I look at these player agreements, oh, well, that's a fidget spinner, not a widget spinner. But anyway, looking at the scope of control that teams exercise over players, you can't go out and sign with another team. Mm-hmm. You're just they're playing the game. It's not like, all right, I'm going to deliver to you one championship trophy and then you will pay me $5 billion. Like that doesn't happen. You know, I see them worded a lot as independent contractor agreements. There are ways that you can push it towards the independent contractor agreement side, but I think ultimately what I'm seeing more and more, especially in the more established esports and League of Legends, I haven't dealt with it as much in Overwatch, but you're seeing pushes towards employment agreements. And that's because, I mean, what are sports players are not independent contractors. Mm-hmm. They can't just, you know, I'm going to go play with the Warriors for a while and deliver them something and, you know, do whatever and then go to another team. And, you know, those rights can be assigned. They can be transferred to another team. They control you while you're under contract. So I think it's going to push a lot more towards the employment side. I think that for a long time it has been on the independent contractor side, and yeah, there hasn't been a lot of scrutiny from any regulatory bodies of that. So yeah, it's been fine for now.
Now, I have worked as an independent contractor in the past. I did not like it. I think I have much more preferred the employee model. I feel like there's always the benefits, because there was a point where I got injured while I was a contractor. And it's kind of like, it was on the job, but it's like, it doesn't really matter. It's not part of my contract. I'm just out. There's no compensation. I'm done.
Yeah.
And whereas when I've been injured at my new place of work, you know, they cover it. There's workers' comp, you know, they have to pay those benefits because I'm an employee.
Yep.
Question in chat coming from Maybe Buzz. Is there an option that is better for players? Should they want to go towards the employee model, or should they rather stay with the independent contractor?
So I think that is a person-to-person question, but to use an anecdote, my wife is an independent contractor. She's a consultant, and so she goes in, consults on particular jobs, and then gets paid by those jobs that she consults on. She likes it because the pay is really good, and you know, she can set up an LLC, gets paid there, things become business expenses, there are good tax benefits to it, and you have a lot of independence. You can go jump around a lot of places. But I think to maybe Buzz's point is it's not just about which players should prefer, it's which one it actually is. And I think by and large, they are employees. And I think that it makes more sense because of the control the team has, so that if you do get injured, they don't just dump you. Mm-hmm. Like, you're still their player. I mean, look at sports leagues, right? Like, maybe you reach a buyout with those players who get injured or they retire or something like that. But if they get injured, they're still on your payroll. You got to take care of them. You're trying to get them back to health so they can perform. Like, I just think naturally it's going to push more and more towards the employee side of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it's going to be better overall for the health of esports to just move towards that. Everyone is employed. There's no flakiness, I guess is the best way I can put it.
Yeah.
And I think it might be more common for an independent contractor if it's a single player versus a team, possibly. Like, if you looked at StarCraft 2, I think that was a little different because I think, especially in Korea, those structures were already in place and have been for a while. But like maybe Super Smash Brothers and the like fighting games might be more of a contract compared to like Overwatch or League, where it's a team that is employed by the organization. But that's just my thought on it.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you're jumping in, man. It's a lot better than the okay.
Yeah. Okay. There's one more thing that I wanted to bring up on this, and that we had talked about it a couple weeks ago when we were meeting and kind of going over all the topics we wanted to discuss, and that was deliverables. Now, that was like it's not a batch of services, is what we said, but rather
Yeah.
ongoing practice, tournament sponsorships. Does that differentiate at all from contractor to employee, or is it basically the same?
Yeah, so that's sort of what I was getting at with the idea of 100 widgets. There's your deliverable, right? Like whereas the services that you're performing are sort of this ongoing thing. Like you could structure it so that for each tournament you perform in, we will pay you this amount of money. Maybe then it's a little bit more like an independent contractor. So there are ways you could structure the agreements more like an independent contractor agreement, but at the same time you would have to they are contracting to deliver you, services at a tournament by tournament basis. They could go out and contract with another team for the next tournament. So I will perform at tournaments 1, 3, and 5 for you, and 2 and 4 for this other team. It doesn't really work as well. You could structure it that way to push it more towards an independent contractor thing, but that's not really how it works. So you could make it more of a deliverables thing, but I just think practically that's not going to happen. How does that help with sponsorships? How does that help with continuity? How does that help with practicing with the team? Things like that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think when other players see that from like they look at someone at the top of the scene and they'll see this is what this person is doing. This is what I need to be doing as well. So they'll want to look out for like that employee contract and finding exactly what they need, kind of going back to what we were talking about at the start of the show. So with that, I need to get better at transitions. I think that's the main issue.
That was great. I wouldn't have known, man. If you hadn't said anything, I would have been like, all right, we're transitioning.
Okay.
Okay.
That's just the joke now. So next I want to talk about unions. Now, I think you had mentioned just before the show, and I know I had saw something about it, maybe on ESPN, but I think it was Overwatch and CS:GO that you said.
Yeah, they both announced players
associations. Player unions. Okay.
Yep, not unions.
Okay, so
associations.
I guess we'll get into that. So I guess we'll start. What is the difference between a player association and a union?
All right, I want to make sure I don't get in above my pay grade here. There are other lawyers who focus on this in particularly, but to my knowledge, the difference between a union and association is a union is actually coming together to collectively bargain. They're actually pooling their bargaining power. And an association is basically just a group that we kind of associate, and we're not necessarily bargaining together yet. So there was some questions, by the way, asking for authorization cards, which I believe goes to that we are authorizing the association to bargain on our behalf, getting that collective bargaining end. And both associations, to my knowledge, have said that they declined to comment on whether they were collecting authorization cards yet, but that's sort of the difference. So an association is sort of a preliminary step to collective bargaining, but you could create an association for anything, right? You could create I'm not thinking of any good examples right now, but basically any group, it's kind of like a big club that comes together. They have a shared interest and maybe they want to try to push that interest a little more. So players associations are going to try to look out for players' rights. They may do things like try to come up with a contract bank, try to come up with people that they recommend that players work with. They're basically going to be trying to help the players protect their rights. So I think it's a great thing. I think it's something that is needed because right now, I mean, for example, it's hard to know if you're getting a good contract. It's hard to know what a good contract looks like. You don't know who to talk to. You don't know what to do, especially when you're coming onto the scene. You're looking to other people to guide you. And so with that, you're going to have an association that you can look to right away that is hopefully, and I think likely, given the people that are involved, going to act in your best interests and try to help you get on the right foot. I mean, Sir Scoots in CSGO has been around forever, literally since the beginning of esports, I think, as far as a professional scene. Ellen Savian, NFLPA, and has done a bunch of agent work, and she's fantastic. She's really, really good at what she does, and I'm very excited that she's involved. So really good people. I think they're going to be very helpful organizations. I think it's things that the franchises and the teams have seen coming, and I think it's just a natural step in the evolution of building this scene.
For sure. And I think that's only going to grow as we progress further, because esports is going to become more established. Therefore, players are going to know more about what they're going to be needing, for whether it's financial or emotional or whatever kind of support they need. And I think that's a whole different topic that we don't have to discuss, because I don't think we're experts on it.
Well, I also think, to one of your points real quick, I think one of the exciting things about esports is it will become more established.
Mhm.
So we will get these organizations, but at the same time, tomorrow a new esport could pop up. That's just something that's not happening in traditional sports. Like, you come up with a new game, new esport. And so you'll still have to like have this sort of growth with any of those as they come up.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of that, actually, I wanted to know, when creating either player association or probably more likely a union, would you prefer doing it on a game by game basis, or just a general broad esports players union?
I don't know that I've thought about that in particular. I think you should have it on a game to game basis at a minimum. So you should have a players association for each individual esport. And then I think you could have a wider one as well, to share best practices, to kind of coordinate, to learn what people are doing in other esports, and just help create the camaraderie and everything.
Kind of like sending a representative basically from each game to meet and discuss.
Yeah, I don't know how you would structure it exactly, but I mean, it sounds like a cool idea to me.
Just gather everyone in a conference room, round table.
Form our own association.
Yep.
Yeah.
There'll be a
campfire going.
There'll be a King Arthur, I don't know, just off to the side. He'll control it. So
create some sort of shapely table.
Yep, exactly. There was one more thing that we had talked about. Let me see if I can phrase this the best possible way. We talked about League of Legends, the NALCS franchising. At one point, teams were told to not talk to each other about pay.
That's a rumor. I don't know that for sure, but
okay. Well,
I've heard.
We'll say that.
Yeah. So I have heard that teams in NALCS were told not to talk to each other about certain things. So don't talk, about player salaries or different aspects that could be construed as antitrust violations. Mm-hmm. So basically, you don't want people colluding. So think about OPEC. People have heard of OPEC typically. A bunch of oil exporters who get together in Saudi Arabia or wherever they get together, somewhere in the Middle East, and say, you know what, like, we're not making enough money, so let's stop producing as much oil and we'll all drive the prices up. But they all have to work together, because what happens is, as that price goes up, one of them could go off and say like, ooh, price is going up, I can make a lot of money. So they collude in order to keep that price high. Mm-hmm.
That's I know this is kind of outside your scope. That's to prevent the antitrust laws from kicking in and things getting shut down because they didn't follow like the proper legal structure. Things become unfair, I think that makes a lot of sense, because we don't want an NALCS or HGC, which is what we focused on here, developing where the top 3 teams say, all come together and say, we're only going to pay these players this amount, or we're going to play them this amount, or whatever it is, what it ends up being. And then it just comes this clown fiesta of teams trying to like scramble to match them or figure out how to take advantage of them.
Yeah. And, like, they could all agree to keep the price artificially low. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's the real concern, right? Like, we want to make more money, so we all try to keep it low. Or yeah, you could have a couple teams colluding, but I think really the big worry is about all of the teams coming together and reaching some sort of agreement. Because if one of them is out, like, that team would be the really appealing one that would get all the good players because they're paying them well. Mm-hmm. And then the other guys would be sitting there trying to pay them, pennies. So you want to avoid that, but that's another reason I think that the teams are anticipating associations and collective bargaining, is because once you get the players collectively bargaining, then you can have the teams doing the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And maybe Buzz asked in chat, and I think this kind of touches a little bit on the formation of unions and associations. Do you think player strikes are a legitimate concern for teams and the games?
I have not thought about that. I mean, you have that. It makes sense. It makes sense to me because you look at the NBA, you look at Major League Baseball, you look at these games, these traditional sports where that's happened, right? So the last lockout for the NBA, you had the two sides kind of try to come together to renegotiate the collective bargaining agreement, and they couldn't agree. And so then the union dissolved, which meant that the owners, if they were talking at all, would now be violating antitrust laws, and each player would negotiate separately. So you had that happen. And sometimes baseball or basketball, like their seasons all of a sudden shorten to this tiny amount of time where you only have 40 games in the season instead of 82 normally for basketball. Mm-hmm. So I think it conceivably could happen as well with esports.
Yeah, I think especially as more and more teams get involved, like maybe we'll see Overwatch eventually at 32 teams, like just like in the NFL. So it's more, I think it's more likely as we get more people involved. Not necessarily meaning it's going to happen, but just there's a higher chance of it happening, I guess is the best way to say it.
Yeah.
And like then there's how many teams in the NBA? And they have more, well, they don't have as many
30,
players, I guess, but
30. It's like 30, 32.
Yeah, something along those lines, but I guess the NFL is like they have 53 people on the active roster, and then they have a bunch of staff and everything. So I don't want to get into numbers anyway. Okay, so
no reading, no numbers, just talking on this stream.
Well, speaking of reading, we're going into viewer questions next.
All right.
Excellent transition.
I will be. Thank you very much. Okay. So first, Yoshi's going to send the question he has to Duncan. We'll do that one at the end. So our first question comes to us from Reddit. His name is his or her name, sorry, is Cockley. And their question was, I need to make sure I am scrolling all the way. Oh, okay. Esports professionals are young adults, even teenagers. Finding representation at that age group is a second thought, if they even consider it at all. What is being done to reach out to these young players to let them know they can and should seek legal representation?
So I think the associations are going to be a big part of that. I really think that those will be sort of the magnets for a lot of that attention. And I think since esports players do tend to start so young in high school often, that you're going to see some sort of outreach going there as well from the associations. I know that there are efforts as well to create kind of a both collegiate and high school esports scene. I don't want to compare it to the NCAA because who likes the NCAA except for the NCAA, but some better model than the NCAA to help run collegiate and high school esports. So I think that there are efforts going that way. I think what we need to be doing is having active parents when they're that age who are thinking and looking out for them. And frankly, if you're under 18, you can't sign a valid contract without your parent's signature. So, I mean, baked into the law are some protections. I think we might. So, for example, there are child actor laws that are supposed to protect them, so you don't have situations like, I think it was Macaulay Culkin who made a ton of money with Home Alone, and then his parents basically were like, all right, yeah.
Yep.
And took off with a bunch of money or spent a bunch of money. I think you could eventually see pushes for kind of the same child actor protections that they have in film, but I don't know if we'll get there fully. So I think there are a couple different things that could happen, but the big thing is parents be involved, especially since esports is the biggest thing amongst that young demographic. I mean, more people under 20 watching esports by far than are watching traditional sports.
Yep. Definitely. And I know several people that are in that demographic. So Cockley actually had 3 questions, and we'll knock them all out. The next one was, how often are you seeing organizations having one-sided negotiations where they are represented and the athlete is not?
So typically never, because I'm usually representing the player. So
Well, that's good. That's good.
it's pretty hard for me to imagine a situation where the player wouldn't be represented if I'm involved. I know that that does happen. And one of the ways I know that happens is because I start to work with a player or players and I say, hey, send me your contract. And they send me their contract. And I'm like, you never talked to a lawyer, did you? And they're like, no. I can tell because of how terrible the contract is or what they signed up for that was terrible.
Mm-hmm.
And so you see it kind of after the fact. And that's the point I want to make too. This might come up later, but I use the sort of medicine analogy. You know, they talk about how an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That, and for those in the EU, gram of prevention is worth a kilogram of cure, I guess. But the same thing applies, if not more so, than at least the same in law. Like getting somebody to look at your contract up front is so worth it compared to having it blow up in your face later on. I sort of compare it to insurance as well, right? Like you pay health insurance hoping you'll never get sick, but if you do get sick, then you have that coverage. So paying a lawyer is sort of like that. Legal insurance is contract insurance. So yes, it costs some money up front to do it, but it's going to save you a huge headache if anything goes wrong on the back end. So getting back to your original question about the one-sided representation, teams definitely are still, the more professional teams are starting to recommend to players that they consult an attorney. They don't necessarily point them to any attorneys. I think the associations are going to help with that because they're going to say, here are some people you could talk to about your contract. But I think more and more we're going to see players at least represented by an agent, if not also an attorney, one or the other or both. And it's going to get better, but right now it's still happening a ton. I mean, I have seen some teams who are not represented by lawyers, but I'm sure there are far more players who are not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and going into that, I do want to visit our disclaimer because Ryan here is a lawyer who focuses on the player contracts and negotiations, drafting the contracts, and his advice here is essentially seek out a lawyer if you are looking to sign a contract. Essentially, if someone approaches you with a contract, they have probably had someone draft this, kind of in the same way where you're going to hire Ryan to counter draft or negotiate that deal.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like if you work in a... Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you work in a shop where certain safety items are required. You're going to want those safety items because everyone else has them for a good reason. Your team has a lawyer for a good reason. You want a lawyer for a good reason.
Yeah. I will say I can still tell that some teams have used Google Esquire to draft their agreements. I mean, they're pulling stuff off the internet and cobbling it together to make a contract. You still want a lawyer, if not more so in those situations, because you don't know how terrible those contracts are. I would almost much rather have a good lawyer on the other side than no lawyer at all, just because you don't know what you're going to get.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, you want a lawyer no matter who's set up that contract on the other side, at least just to scan over it. And you can tell a lawyer, look, I don't want you to negotiate anything. I don't want you to draft anything. Just look over this and tell me what are the big red flags. And then I'll go talk to the team about it. I really prefer to be in on the negotiations because I've seen what happens when I'm not, when the players just go it alone and things that get screwed up. It helps a lot to have a lawyer just to say, hey, don't back yourself into this corner, to signal, hey, you just agreed to a contract, so don't like go screwing around with this or go trying to shop still because you basically just said yes. So you want to be there. You want a lawyer with the negotiations to help you through those. But if you want, you can have a lawyer just say, here are the big red flags, here are the things you want to think about, and then you can take it from there. So you can always limit the scope of the engagement to whatever you need or think you need.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of like, no matter what, always seek out a lawyer. Have you ever seen a case where, or know of a case potentially where an organization has a lawyer and that lawyer also is representing the player, or would that just be a conflict of interest? I would assume it would, but
yeah, you can't do that.
Okay.
So that would be a violation of lawyers' ethical duties. So you're not supposed to represent two parties who are directly adverse to each other. And in fact, I'm pretty sure that's not even a waivable conflict. We have what we call waivable conflicts and non-waivable conflicts. Waivable conflicts being where you can get agreements from both sides to say, yeah, you can still represent one side in this matter. So think of a lawyer who represents a team to maybe do their corporate work. I helped set this team up. I haven't dealt with any of their player agreements or anything like that. I just helped them form the LLC or the incorporation. Boom, we were done.
Okay.
And then I get this player who says, I want to sign with this team. Can you review my contract? You would probably have to get a waiver there, almost certainly. You would have to say, hey, team, are you okay if I represent this player? It's a different matter. It's not directly related. You are adverse, but it's not in the same matter. And so you could probably get waivers there as long as both sides were okay with it. But saying, I'm going to represent both of you on the same matter, negotiating both sides, because how can you represent them both and argue for both of their rights? Like, you're arguing against yourself. I don't think that would ever be a situation you want to find yourself in.
I don't think I've ever won an argument with myself.
It's the ultimate, inner conflict, I guess is the right word.
Yeah.
So, okay, we'll move on to the next question. And this one comes from MSU Lander from Reddit once again. And they ask...
Thanks, Reddit.
Yep. Reddit came in big, actually. They had a lot of good questions. So they asked, as a lawyer who would be interested in getting into esports law, what fields of law should I focus on for experience, and what was your pathway to dealing with esports? I almost said eel sports.
Eel sports. Yeah. So I laugh because I didn't really take anything that I probably should have. So entertainment law, intellectual property law, employment law. If they have a sports law class, take that. Most of what you're dealing with is contract drafting and negotiation. So if you go to law school, you're almost certainly going to have to take a contracts class. Pay attention. If there's an applied contracts class or a contracts drafting class or a negotiations class, take those. I think those would be very useful. We deal with employment law all the time, as we talked about earlier in the show, and employees versus independent contractors. You'll get into that stuff. Entertainment law or anything that deals with intellectual property, that is a huge part of those contracts. And sports law is going to deal with a lot of these different things. So those are my biggest recommendations. If you want to work on the team side, take all of those, and in addition, take some corporate transactions, because you're going to be doing entity formation. Take like a finance class or secured transactions for all the investment type work that happens. Take tax if you really hate yourself, but really, really want to do the tax side stuff. I leave all the tax stuff to people a lot smarter than me, and who apparently are much bigger masochists than me. But that's another class to consider. So trying to think if there's anything else. I'm sure there are more, but I would say those are the big ones that you want to hit.
So the next question, we'll move on. Liv, you asked this basically the exact same question in Twitch chat, but this one also came from Reddit, but we can maybe give the credit to Liv here.
Thanks,
for organizations that fail to pay their players, how do you hold them accountable? And has there been an instance in recent memory where you were able to successfully litigate these organizations?
So I won't talk about specific cases, but I would say there are a couple of steps you want to take. One, do your practical due diligence on the organization before ever entering into the contract. Look into them, talk to players who have been there before, find out how things went. If things didn't go right, why not? Try to just find out what the lay of the land is. Talk to somebody who knows the team outside the team. Talk to people inside the team about what they're doing as well. I frankly am at the point where I kind of want to ask, and maybe I don't show it to the players, but I want to say, all right, show me some balance sheets. Show me you actually have money. Show me that you're actually going to be able to pay my players for at least 3 months or whatever. Push for that due diligence. They could say no. And if they do, and you're not comfortable with it, walk away. The other thing is as I said, the ounce of prevention, like get your contract looked at. Get a good contract, because if you get a bad contract, it's going to be hard to fix it on the back end. So contract attorneys call themselves pre-litigators. They are trying to both prevent litigation and they are dealing with the litigation before it ever happens. So get that contract in good shape. That is, I think, easily the best thing you can do if you decide to enter a deal, because you want to try to avoid all the scenarios where it could blow up. Occasionally it does blow up. You know, I have had situations where I've said there's just not enough money and the contract is not if there's some attorney's provision for equipment prevails in there.
Hold on, just a moment, bud. Looks like we're dealing with some lag on your end. You went straight robot.
Oh no.
And the camera is frozen.
Yeah. Try resetting your call, bud. Leave call and join up again.
Ignore what you're seeing on the screen for now. We'll be back in a second.
Some technical difficulties. Oh, I'm in two places at once. Ah, dang it. Sorry, guys. He is trying to come back into it. As always, press F in chat for respect.
F in the chat.
323.
Okay. Now, while we're waiting for him to come back, Dunk, you have the questions from Twitter, correct?
From Twitter?
Did Liv give you any questions?
Liv's question she posted in
Okay,
Twitch
that was
chat.
the only one. Okay.
That was the Twitter question.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Do we have to restart the call maybe? Like
It shouldn't have to, because this is just a enter as you please kind of call.
Okay, is he typing anything? Because I have full screen.
Does this work? Twitter's fine, it's fine, but the video is not. Let's try leaving the call real quick.
Okay. Ignore what you see on the screen.
I'm back in.
Okay.
This picture.
There
Try
we go.
turning. Your voice is there.
Just
yeah,
need
hold on 1 second.
just need the video. There we go.
All right.
We're back.
Sorry about that. I just
Back
had
in
to
business.
reset Discord, that's all. Everything else was working except for video.
That's odd.
All right. Where were we?
Okay.
Players' rights, yay, something like that.
We are actually at our last question now.
Oh, okay.
Actually,
Was
as
I
a part of that last question, and this is kind of like probably before they ever became a professional player. When you're looking at players who probably don't make a lot of money through the game, or they're trying to go professional and working a side job at the same time, how do they come to afford paying for legal advice? I mean, at least in my perception, when I think of getting legal advice, I'm like, oh man, how much cash do I have to shell out? Like, let's be honest here.
Yeah. So that is a challenge sometimes. I think one thing is if you're playing a team sport and you have a group of people you play with, then you're really defraying the cost by 5. So if you think about it that way, it's like a fifth the cost if you all are willing to share in it. The other thing is depending on the length of the contract, a contract review to read it and give you thoughts can take anywhere between 45 minutes to 2 hours. So, at least getting that security, it's sort of like I said, paying insurance on something else. And so if you split that fee between 5 people, and that's going to provide you some peace of mind, actually, especially if you're about to jump into your first contract that could be serious and you just want to make sure you don't get in trouble, then, that's pretty big. I think
have you had that?
Huh?
Have you had that, like where you're negotiating one contract, but it's for 5 people?
Yeah, and you have to make sure that everybody agrees to the joint representation. And if any conflicts come up, you might have to step back, but typically that doesn't happen amongst a team who's all come together. But you at least have to address it. You have to talk about it. The other thing you can do is, I know that there are agents out there who work on a commission. And so, if you pay them 5%, I am wary of doing that on your total contract, but if you're not going to be making very much money, that might be something that's more feasible to do. And they may not be able to give you all the legal advice, but they will hopefully have seen a fair number of contracts and can at least say, here's some red flags, here's some things we should be concerned about. You probably want to talk to a lawyer about this and that. So they might be able to narrow it down for you a little bit more.
All right. Okay. Thank you. That's actually really good information,
Mm-hmm.
because I know that if I was a little bit younger, I would definitely be like, oh, I need to see a lawyer. Oh, no.
Yeah. No, and it is intimidating. I mean, I try to be as transparent with people as possible when I talk to them about like my rates and how I bill, but I'm in this space because I love it. If I could do it for free, I would. Unfortunately, I've got a law firm and they want me to, be doing work, and they're going to be like, well, if you're doing esports work and not getting paid for it, how about you go read a bunch of documents for this big litigation instead? And I'm like, so,
Now,
I still have to do something.
we do have a follow-up question in chat, and
Wow.
it does get more specific into it.
Okay.
What kind of hourly rate do you see in the esports attorney industry? I'm assuming the question leaning towards, what would we pay you for an hour's worth of your time?
Oh man, I don't know if.
And if you can't answer it, that's fine. I understand.
I don't think I can talk about my rates directly, but I will say that I'm located. Excuse me, I'm located in North Carolina, and I work with people all over the country. And I talk to people like this on Discord, or it used to be Skype until heard about all the nice vulnerabilities that they had. But I mean, most of esports is done on Twitter, on Discord, and on the phone. By and large, I'm on Discord, frankly. So, I can talk to people anywhere. I'm not in a major market. I'm not in Los Angeles. I'm not in New York. So my rates are very competitive compared to somebody who is in Los Angeles or New York or some other major market. It's going to vary. It's going to depend on who ends up being the lawyers. But I will tell you that something you can do is, for some of the contract provisions, you may not be able to get somebody who understands the context of esports. But if you're worried about a termination clause, like we've talked about, you could go talk to somebody more local and say, hey, I just need somebody to look over this. So, it's going to vary in the quality, but it's a decision you're going to have to make. It's kind of like buying anything, right? You may buy something that's a little lower quality that's cheaper. You might buy something a little higher quality that is going to get you the whole job done, but it's going to be a decision you have to make.
I will say the gist of it is, chat, if you are looking for specific rates, you're going to need to contact him directly and discuss your needs, and his rates will reflect that. So,
yeah. And I'll typically take and just talk to somebody about that initial conversation without charging them anything. I mean,
what a great guy.
If it's just we're talking and this is your situation, unless I really dive into work, why am I going to bill you for that?
Fair enough.
All right, moving on to I think this is our final question, unless another one pops up.
I still have Yoshi's question.
Okay, we'll do that one last. But I wanted to get into this one because from what we saw, it sounded like a lawyer had written this question. So,
yeah.
And this is from I think it's RBI 411. They ask, I'm curious about how difficult litigating in the esports field is. I doubt most esports organizations are paying high enough player salaries to satisfy diversity jurisdiction. So how do you handle representation in what could be many different jurisdictions? Prohak Vice, I think I said that correctly.
Well done. Yeah, no, that was good.
Common choice of law/forum clauses in contracts that make one state far more common to litigate in.
So there is a lot going on with that question. A lot of the push is towards arbitration provisions, and arbitration, I think, is often preferable for both sides because it tends to be cheaper. You sort of circumvent a lot of the more onerous rules of discovery and other procedure in a big litigation, and you tend to reach a faster resolution as well. If you do go traditional litigation, then yes, it's sort of a weird situation because when they're talking about diversity jurisdiction, which you need, I mean, we don't want to get too boring into the law, is you need complete diversity where all the parties on the opposite sides of the V are from different states. And you need an amount in controversy that is at least $75,000, or you need a federal question, which if we're just dealing with contracts, probably isn't going to come up. So the litigation, luckily, I've been able to avoid a lot of litigation, and that's actually something that I try to avoid generally. I think that if you can get things taken care of outside of litigation, either with mediation, either with sending some demand letters and having discussions, that's a lot better way to go. It saves people money, it gets a good result. You typically get both sides happy, maybe not happy, but not mad either. litigation is typically treated a lot more as like a zero-sum game, whereas typically you can find some sort of at least mutually beneficial resolution or something that's closer to the middle than one side taking it all. So that is a bunch of different answers to that question. But if you did, I mean, if we wanted to get theoretical, you would probably have to do pro hoc vice, or you would have to only litigate in your whichever jurisdiction you're in.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of this is probably going to be happening in California since so much of that happens there. But I mean, Dota, CSGO, Heroes, a bunch of other games happen all over the world. So arbitration looks even better when you start talking about international deals and things between like, you know, U.S. companies and foreign players, or foreign companies and domestic players, things like that.
I think you see a lot of that, especially with the Overwatch League.
Yeah, there's a lot of that with Overwatch talking. And it was funny too, because coming from Dota, we don't talk like the Dota community did not talk about domestic versus oh shoot, I just forgot the term for them. Imports. It's just, you just have players all over the place. And then you get in the league and you talk about domestic versus import, Overwatch as well. I just, you know, I like to think we're all people. But yeah, you are going to get more of that, especially since it is an international thing. Isn't that also exciting, like relative to traditional sports? You do get like some international with traditional sports, but I think esports is just so much more on that forefront.
Yeah. True, actually, we see a lot of players, especially not necessarily in the HGC, although albeit we do have a lot of Canadian players, but we kind of bundle them all together as North Americans. But I definitely in the other sports like Overwatch or League of Legends, where bringing over a European, Korean, Chinese player is very common.
Yeah. Yep.
So leading into the next question, and Yoshi, I'm going to say Yoshi. I'm going to go with Yoshi. This question actually has to do, he is writing about rights to publicity, or the IP in the form of esports. He goes into specifics. Who owns the right to their game of their gameplay? I'm going to read through it. I assume the form of where/win plays a major factor here. Teams may have contracts. Does this vary from game to game? Do game companies like Valve own rights to all Dota 2 gameplay? How does that work with Twitch? Do people running the tournament have a say? For example, YouTubers who do a compilation video of players' highlights during a tournament, how would actually it cuts off there at the end. Rip.
Oh man, Yoshi. Yes, to a lot of that. That was a very loaded, very long question. I think with specifics, we'd have to get a little bit more into that. Maybe reach out and we can talk more about that. But this is actually one of the big differences between esports and traditional sports. Who owns the game? The NFL, for all the control it has, does not own the ball. Anybody could go out in their backyard and play football, and they could buy a non-NFL football. They could make their own football, and it would not be a problem. Whereas with esports, you have a publisher, and ultimately, as we talked a little bit last week, like the publisher determines everything. The publisher is God. Like what they say goes. And so you have very different models in terms of control. You have Riot and Blizzard, which have a much more top-down approach, and you have Valve, which has a much more laissez-faire approach. I think there are benefits and downsides to both. But the IP ultimately is going to be owned by the developer. And the developer gives out different rights. So we just had this big discussion in Dota when I believe it was ESL. Don't quote me on that exactly, but there was a tournament going on and a bunch of streamers were watching in-game and streaming the tournaments and commenting on them themselves. So like Admiral Bulldog, Banana Slam, BSJ, there are these guys who are players or former players who were commenting on it without any of the tournament's kind of add-on, any of their overlay or any of their commentary. And they started getting takedown notices from Twitch, DMCA takedown notices. And there was this big hubbub because Valve occasionally comes down from on high every 6 months and gives some sort of ambiguous statement about how you're supposed to play nice in the sandbox. And then they go away until everybody says, hey, we don't know what you mean. And then they come down from on high again. They say, this is what we meant. And we're like, okay, we'll see you again in 6 months, I guess. And so Valve had this video policy saying you could stream like they thought they could stream, but then the tournament came in and was like, no, we need these rights. And then Valve came in again and clarified a little bit more. We're getting this iterative process, a little bit more what players could and could not do. So all of that ultimately is in Valve's control, what rights they're giving out. And Riot and Blizzard control that a lot more closely. Probably helps that Blizzard with Overwatch League just, I'm pretty sure they acquired MLG, and then MLG just does all their stuff. Like, no questions asked. And so they, I'm pretty sure, control all of it. In player contracts, there is often an assignment of rights in the results or in the gameplay from the player to the team, just so that there's no doubt. So the team will own the results and the gameplay that the player creates in a tournament. Now, they want this for multiple reasons. They don't want there to be any confusion about who ultimately owns those championships, or, or if they want to put together compilations of this is what the team accomplished this year. They want to be able to put those gameplay results into that compilation. So there typically is an assignment of intellectual property rights that goes along. I don't work with the developer, and I'm not working with the negotiations between the developers and these production companies or the teams, at least not yet. I don't plan on representing many teams, if any, but with the production companies, like, they're going to have some sort of distribution rights that they get and media rights that they get. And there will be some sort of assignment of a license or something along those lines so that they can distribute content. I haven't seen those yet, but I think that's an area that is very interesting. And frankly, I think our firm is really well positioned to do, because we've done like broadcaster and retransmission rights and syndication rights for decades. So
I feel like you're touching on it a little bit there. This is actually the second part Yoshi got back to me to that question. Oh, yeah. How would they go about ensuring they contact the proper authorities to avoid legal repercussions, like the ownership of like these IP rights?
So how would who go about contacting streamers, or?
I'm gonna. It's a long question. I'm trying to pick it apart and really understand it.
You out there listening? Send us more.
I'm assuming he's talking about like the IP. So like, I'm gonna use Nintendo as an example, because I know that Nintendo basically says you can't talk about Nintendo, you can't show like Nintendo games on like Twitch, which is why we don't see a lot of like Mario Kart streamers or anything, because they get taken down so quickly.
They have speedrunners though that are out there.
Yeah, and sometimes they enforce it, sometimes they don't. It's kind of weird, but I think that's kind of like in the same realm of like what he's talking about. How does Blizzard go about ensuring they have the proper authority to like avoid a legal repercussion, like to make I'm gonna say like to make sure that if they host a tournament that was followed, for example, YouTubers. Oh, okay. So there was a follow-up question for YouTubers who do compilation videos of player highlights during a tournament.
Oh man. Yeah. Man. So yeah, call me.
Yeah.
That's what that sounds like. There is a whole host of issues that could come up with this. Not everything is fair use. If you're monetizing things, you're probably not. But there's parody law. There's all sorts of things that I would have to know the specific context of what sort of compilations you're doing, and what context you're going to use it in. Is it monetized? Is it not? There are a lot of specific questions that we'd have to get into before I think I could get to an answer. The joke about lawyers is you ask them a question, the answer is always maybe.
Yeah.
Or it depends. Is actually the big answer is it depends. So it depends on your circumstances and what's going on. So Yoshi, feel free to reach out. Like I said, we've got some excellent intellectual property lawyers. I bounce things off them all the time. I'm doing more and more of that work. We've got a fantastic entertainment lawyer who represents musicians, and we do film company rights and things like that. So, if you're really that worried about it, just give a call or talk to somebody else and get into the specifics of whatever you're really worried about. So usually on YouTube, you get like a DMCA notice, like especially these smaller things, you'll get a DMCA notice. And then there's a process for how you can like push back against the DMCA notice and claim like, no, I'm legitimately using this and why. And then after that, like this goes into like hosting. We could get into like section 230 and like, you know, why comments exist on the internet, because there were some cases where they almost didn't, or if they did, whoever was hosting the comments would be liable for them. I wrote an article on it. Lots of fun issues out there when you talk about intellectual property.
Okay. All right. Well,
sorry for the incomplete answer, Yoshi. I just don't want to get in trouble trying to talk about everything that it could possibly be.
Well, thank you anyway, Yoshi, for the question. It's definitely got Ryan's brain turning. So
got my nerd on.
Yep. All right. So that actually, I think, will end the show. We've discussed everything that we wanted to talk about, and we've gotten to all the questions that we wanted to. So I'm gonna turn the floor over to Dunk so you can give a few shout outs.
Yeah, shout out to everyone in chat for stopping in, all the viewers who gave out their questions. We really appreciate it. We did a lot of work posting on Twitter and on Reddit to gather those questions. Very helpful, gave us a lot more information, things we didn't talk about already in the show. We appreciate it. Shout out to the HeroesHype crew, modding the chat, giving us the sweet logos. Shout out, of course, to my girlfriend, who I believe is home, finally, or hopefully. And for those of you who don't already, please follow me at my stream, twitch.tv/dunkstick, and follow me on Twitter down below. Thank you.
All right. Now, Ryan, I know you were surprised by it last week. Are you prepared for shout-outs this week?
I am prepared for this. Yeah. So first and foremost, and I can't believe I forgot this last week, shout out to my mom, who was super supportive of me playing video games throughout my childhood, and who could beat Sonic with a higher score and more lives, albeit she would take far longer than me. Sonic 2, back on the Sega, could also beat me at Tetris and Dr. Mario. So she was always very supportive of the video games. Thanks, Mom. Look where I am now. Shout out to you guys, Argy and Dunk, for doing this. It has been a ton of fun. I hope that this won't be the last of them, because this has been great. I really enjoyed it. I hope to see the Heroes scene grow. Thanks to Angie, who helped connect me to you all, and Eunice and the whole HeroesHype crew. Y'all have been great. Thanks to everybody on Reddit who reached out with questions and who put them into chat. Shout out to my law firm, Brooks Pierce. Thanks for supporting esports. Thanks for supporting me in the endeavors to get out there. And yeah, if anybody has any other questions, shoot me a message, follow me on Twitter, shoot me an email, Discord, whatever.
Will do. All right. For me, thank you so much, Ryan, for being on the show. It's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed talking and just learning a lot. Honestly, a lot. I have to I have to rewatch these episodes probably to just kind of process everything that we've gone over, and it's been great. And I'm looking forward to it. Thank you, Dunk, for joining me again. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you to Brooks Pierce for giving Ryan to us for a couple hours. I know it's probably hard to let him go for a little while. He's that important.
Don't oversell it too much, man.
Don't oversell it. Okay. Yeah, thank you to everyone who helped set this up. It's been a lot of fun. And shout out to HeroesHype. Make sure to follow us on Twitter, @HeroesHype, for Open Division news. It starts up again next Monday at... It's a little odd because daylight savings time is not a thing in Europe right now. It doesn't start till the end of the month, so they're like an hour closer to us. So it's still the same time, but it's like noon for me. Anyway, at 6 CET, 6 p.m. CET for Europe, and then 6 Pacific time for North America. And we should have news about it at some point for like what server we're playing on and everything soon. Make sure you're watching that and check out our Discord. We have the announcements there as well. So, all right, that'll do it for me. And thank you guys all for watching. See you later.
Have a good night.
Bye.